bit of what the examiners will be looking for and how we can get your score up to the 7 or the 7.5 that you need. So apologies if you know all about the IELTS test and you've taken it 2 or 3 times, but let's hope that after you've done some work with SLC, it's the last test you take and you get the figures you need. One good thing I would say, just this morning I got an email from a doctor I've been tutoring in India. He's gone through the SLC English for Doctors course, and he's done the writing course with me on a one-to-one basis. And great news this morning, he's got 8 overall, so I'm very happy, and he'll be moving to the UK soon. So it just goes to prove, if you follow the course, it works. I know that it's a high quality course. The book we use is excellent. Most of the time it's writing, which is the problem. So by addressing what the examiner is looking for, we can cheat, if you like. We can go in through the back door at it and directly address what we need to. So I'm going to now put a PowerPoint presentation on the screen. You should see the large screen with myself at the side in a small window. So let's try and see what we can get. Now we should be able to see. There we are. So you should be able to see the first page of my PowerPoint. So let's move on. We have the second page. There we are. Okay. Let's take the chat down. So IELTS. You've heard these 5 letters before, and it stands for International English Language Testing System. I would say the most important word in these 5 is international. The test is for people all around the world. It's not specifically focused at any one nationality. So the questions are quite broad. They're not focused in on things which only one set of people could answer. So they're selected for content from a cultural, a religious, a national point of view. So bear that in mind. It's international and the questions are general. Now, how do we make the test possible that we can make a test every Saturday and some Thursdays too, so more than 50 times a year? How can we do that and not begin to repeat? Well, IELTS has a huge bank of materials writers, and they're constantly writing new material, and they test it very thoroughly against different cultures, different religions, different sections of the world, and any which are showing anomalies which are not standardized are thrown out. So it's one of the reasons why IELTS is an expensive test. There's a great deal of testing is done. So how did it come about? Why have we all got IELTS large in our minds? Well, long time ago, more than 20 years ago, it was devised by 3 major stakeholders. It's a test of what a candidate knows in English. And the stakeholders are the British Council, which is basically a government department of the UK, and they promote English as a foreign language and the fact that Britain is a good place to work and to do business and to be educated in. So that's their the reason for being the British Council, and that they operate in about 130 countries. And that they usually are the places where you will sit the test. The tests would be administered by British Council staff. It may not be in a British Council office, depends on numbers. You may sit it in a hotel or some other sort of office. But British Council are one of the stakeholders. Another stakeholder is a a fine old British institution, Cambridge University, top 10 in the world university, and they had massive input into the type of questions. The third stakeholder is IDP, which is basically the Australian version of the British Council. They promote Australia abroad. I think it stands for International Development Programme. It doesn't say Australia in it, but that's the three major stakeholders. And how popular is the test? Well, it's been taken by literally millions of people now, and many, many thousands each week. I can put that into some sort of perspective. There's a test center in Beijing, in China, and each week, 7,000 candidates take the test. 7,000. That's a lot of people. So let's move on. And what's in the IELTS test? We'll see what it's testing. Let me just transition this. There we are. So all 4 skills are tested. We split the skills into those skills which are receptive, reading and listening, so in through our eyes and ears, and then the productive skills are the opposites. We've got speaking and writing. What comes first? Well, the receptive skills. We very much learn to speak by listening, and the same for writing. We can't write unless we've done some reading first. And it's fairly predictable which of these cause the most problems for candidates worldwide. The speaking is probably the easiest of the productives, and the easiest overall. The writing would be the most difficult, the one which causes most problems. I can see people with 7.5, even 8 in the other skills, and perhaps 5.5, 6, 6.5 at writing. Unfortunately, for our purposes, for medical related jobs, we'll need to have 7 in every skill. Or for those of you who are wanting to move to the UK to work as doctors, slightly different. You need to get 7.5 overall, but you could have individual skills less than 7.5. So, for example, if you had 8 in one and only 7 in another, you're still fine. But for the nursing jobs, we need to have 7 overall with nothing below 7. And I think you'll agree, writing is the one which causes most problems. It certainly seems to, from my point of view, dealing with students. So what can we do about it? Well, first of all, we've got to look at what the academic English test is. It's not a vocational exam. It's not testing medical or nursing English. There's nothing to do with it. You may get a medical related question or a reading, perhaps a listening, but it's not specifically aimed at the world of healthcare, medicine. We may be asking candidates to do something in English that you've never had the requirement to do in your own language. And this makes it pretty tough to get to 7 in all 4 skills on the day, coupled with all the other skills. It's a big ask. It's not an easy test. I'm very pleased that I already do speak, read, write, and listen well to English, because the maximum score of 9 theoretically is supposed to be a native speaker, but I'm not sure I get 9 every week, and not in all skills. Sometimes listening is a problem. So reflected against that, European Union candidates operating well as valued members of the workforce, but they're coming in at 4 or 5 out of this possible 9. And to move up 1 band score, according to the British Council, takes the candidate about 200 hours of study. And that's not 200 hours over a couple of weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, you're going to have to consolidate and revisit and look at material, revisit it again in a couple of weeks, 3 or 4 weeks later, and keep recycling it. So it's months to get a band. And where does this fit in the scheme of how much English have you got if you're going for 7? Well, bear in mind that 7 at IELTS would allow a candidate direct entry onto a master's degree course at an English-speaking university in the UK, the US, Australia, anywhere where education is given in English. 7 will allow you direct entry with no more English exams, no more testing, no more pre-course sessions, direct entry. It's a big ask. And I'm certain thousands of British native speakers wouldn't score 7 in all 4 papers. They could be taught to, but you'd need significant input, both in what the examiner's looking for and the strategies you'd need to take the test. That's where SLC can help you. We can shortcut and show you exactly what the examiner is looking for and the strategies to get there. So how do the scores correlate to English levels? Well, the Council of Europe grade your can-do ability in a language. They don't say what you can't do, but what you're capable of doing. So can you ask for and understand directions? Can you order food in a restaurant? Can you write about what you did yesterday? So as you're ticking off the can-dos, you go up in the scales. The scales start at A1, that's the base level. Then it goes A2. Then we start the B band, B1, B2, C1, C2. C2 should be just a little bit below me. That's advanced. Native speaker would be above that. So 7.5 asks for C1. So you've got all of the A band, all of the B band. They want you to be into advanced. 7, you might get B2, but C1 is your aim to comfortably do it. And to do that, you'd have to understand a fairly wide range of demanding texts that require really specific meanings. For example, the subtle difference between something like advertise and promote. When you're writing, when you're speaking, you then have to express your ideas fluently, spontaneously, very little time for preparation, without you. It's got to be snappy. We've got to be able to demonstrate that the words are coming easily to us. We have to use flexible and effective strategies in a range of situations, social, academic, professional purposes. All of these are tested in the IELTS test. It's got to be clear, well constructed text, well constructed speaking. It's got to flow. It shouldn't be starting here, mentioning this, then back to the beginning. It's got to have some sort of element of planning. And this takes a bit of practice, but we can do it. We can do it. So according to IELTS, let's look at 7, take something from the marking criteria for band 7. So the candidate has operational command of the language, though with occasional inaccuracies, so we're not asking for perfect at 7. You can have some inappropriateness, some misunderstandings in some situations, but generally, most of the time, generally handling complex language well and understanding detailed reasoning. So we're not asking for perfect, but to be able to operate pretty well. If we have a look at the scale on the left there, you can see C1 is up near the top, mapped against the IELTS score. That's where you need to be. Not impossible, and many of you operate at 2 or even 3 of those skills already, but just need some coaching, some polishing, if you like, in 1 or 2 of the others. So we're nowhere near the bottom. We're already 3/4 of the way there. We just need to push that extra bit further. People tend to get to this level and then they reach a plateau, a flat part, when no real learning appears to be taking place. What's happened is you understand everything that comes in through your eyes and ears, and when you're speaking and writing, people understand what you've done. So there's no motivation really to improve. But just that final push to prove it to an IELTS examiner one Saturday, it's all we need. So a bit more work and we'd get there. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of sentences, and I think Kate's going to have a little task for you to do, a little poll to do. So let me just show the next slide, and I think Kate will let you do some looking at these 2 sentences and deciding. So here we are. Now, Kate, if you'd like to do your side of things with the poll at this point, we should be able to find out what people think. So everyone knows that the world needs to find something different from oil to run its cars on. This is sentence 1. Sentence 2, it is generally accepted that mankind urgently requires an alternative fuel source to power vehicles and reduce its dependence on fossil-derived fuel. Well, I'm not seeing a poll from my side. Perhaps we can do it by the chat. You should be able to get a chat box. So here we've got our list of people attending. If you could write in the chat box what you think. Here we are. Kate's got this up now. So our quick poll: which of the 2 sentences would score more highly on an IELTS exam? So pop a tick in the one that you think would be best. Yeah, make it a little wider. Okay, so we'll wait a moment for results. Here we are. Unanimous, excellent. 100% of you have chosen the second. It's not surprising. The second one, and this is a good way of judging, it's got a lot of words. Usually in English, if there are more words, it's better. But let's analyze the first one. Everyone knows that the world needs to find something different from oil to run its cars on. Let me move on to my next slide. I'll be able to work with this. Let's move this one out of the way. There we are. So everyone knows that the world needs to find something different from oil to run its cars on. Do you know what the writer's saying here? Yes, it's obvious what the intention of the writer was. It's a sentence which is in okay grammar. There are no spelling mistakes. There's some vocabulary. It's not particularly academic in its vocabulary. So it's not what we call in academic style. And the words I would draw your attention to: everyone knows, needs to find, different from, and run its cars. This is the sort of thing which makes the difference between a 6, a 6.5, and a 7 or a 7.5. These need to be just upped in level. So let me have a look at the next slide and we'll see some suggestions. So we've modified this one. It's the same information. There's nothing new there. But this one uses examples of academic style, academic phrases and vocabulary. So the everyone knows section, I've now changed that to it is generally accepted. That's a little fixed phrase you could use whenever you think, oh yeah, everybody knows this. It is generally accepted. Tick, your examiner likes that. Needs to find. Well, here we are. If you need to find something, you urgently require it. So that would lift our vocabulary levels up into the 7, 7.5 bracket. Different from, so an alternative fuel to fossil fuels, or an alternative route to the usual road. So this framework would be useful for you. To run its cars, to power vehicles. You'll notice that all of the extra ones are, all of the academic style are longer words. Usually the Latin-based words from Latin, which was used in the UK 2,000 years ago, we've retained these Latin-based words. We have other words, we have shorter words. These are from Anglo-Saxon, Anglo, where we get England from, but they're the less formal words. These are the everyday words which we would use fine in speaking, but in writing, we just need to up it to this Latin-based vocabulary. And there are no shortcuts, really. We just have to learn what works, what doesn't, what will make the examiner smile. And it's possible to learn them, just takes a bit of time. So let's move on to our next one. So the main areas looked for by the examiner. Let's start with listening. In the listening section, we'd have 30 minutes of listening plus 10 minutes to transfer answers. So our ability to understand the main points of what we're hearing and the detail. And there are 4 listening sections, 4 scenarios. There'll be day-to-day living, perhaps making arrangements to go to the cinema. There'll be some sort of academic section where perhaps some students are talking to a tutor, or the students are arranging a trip somewhere, but based in a sort of study at college or university background. How do we test this? Well, many different ways. The tasks vary from week to week. It's never a set, you will get this. We can show you the range of question types that you'll get and the best way to tackle each of them. But there are many, many different ways to do it. In following webinars, in the following weeks, we'll be looking in detail at the 4 skills separately. And because the writing causes more problems than most, we're going to look at task 1 in one webinar and task 2 in another webinar. So there'll be 5 webinars which will go into much more detail as to which strategies you would need to use in order to effectively answer each of the skills. So reading, what's in the reading section? Well, we're testing your ability to find the answers from 3 texts. And again, a series of task types. You might have completing a summary, you might have choosing 3 words from the task, from the text. You might have to supply a heading for a paragraph. And IELTS is sneaky. They might have 5 paragraphs, but they'll give you 8 to choose from. So it's not a question of, once you've done 4, the last one must be for question 5. You always have to make a choice. Spelling is important. In the reading, there really isn't an excuse to transfer the correct spelling from the text into an answer sheet. So spelling is most important. How many words would you get in a reading? Well, potentially 6,000. Possibly 6,000 words. Some are shorter. 6,000 would be the absolute limit. So we're looking there at maybe 1,900 words on each of 3 passages, plus 40 questions. I'd be hard pushed to do that in 1 hour. To read 6,000 words of a highly academic nature. The texts come from quality newspapers, from journals, from textbooks perhaps, and they could be on anything. Obviously, the testing system that I talked about earlier will weed out any crazy questions. You won't be asked about how to run ethanol-based fuel car in Brazil, because you wouldn't be expected to know that. But you might get general topics. Usually they're culled from 5 or 6 areas: education, healthcare, good one for us, I think, transport, global warming, things like that. So within those broad areas, and then within them, a huge variety. You'd be very, very lucky to get something which you've studied. And maybe not so lucky, because that can cloud your judgment anyway. If you're reading something and you've studied it closely, you're bringing in outside information, and that might sway your answers. Always bear in mind with the reading, only answer on what's in the text. Don't say, oh yeah, everybody knows this. If it's not in the text, you can't mention it. So you'll need to find the correct areas of the text. So you need to quickly locate which part of the text your answers are in. You might have to make judgments as to what the writer means. So the writing may not be how you would express a thought, an idea, but you have to know what the writer meant at each place. So what do I mean you need to find the correct area? Well, this can help us. If you've got 2,000 words or so, it's split into sections, paragraphs. Each paragraph has one idea, one paragraph. This is how you should be writing, and it's reflected in the reading which has been chosen. If the reading is a little blurred or is not going to work or could be confusing, it's thrown out or modified. Sometimes the examiners will take the basic text and change it to suit their purposes. But we can use that to advantage. One idea, one paragraph. So how do we know what's in a paragraph? Well, the first sentence will tell us. So looking at the first sentence gives you a good idea of what you're going to find in the following paragraph. Occasionally it might be the second sentence, and very, very rarely it might be the last sentence. So if you read the first one, try one more sentence of the paragraph. If still you're not sure, or it's gone straight into the idea without telling you what it's going to do, try the last one. But I would recommend, don't read everything. You don't have time. Always tick, tick, tick. So 6,000 words, not enough time to find it. You have to selectively find out what to read in detail. So how I approach these reading tasks and how I would suggest you do it is read the questions very, very carefully. The questions are more important than the writing. You've got to understand what you're looking for. You can also use prediction, common sense, grammatical knowledge. So bringing these other skills in, what's going to be missing, say, in a gap fill, or what do I have to do here? What words are needed? Is it a noun, a verb, an adjective? So by looking at the requirements in the questions, that will inform you on where you need to read. So let's take an example. Perhaps you've got something about the history of the Ford Motor Company. And one of the questions says, how will the company combat the growing fuel crisis? And you need to find something for the future there. How will they? So they're looking ahead. They want you to find out what's going to happen. So reading various paragraphs, if you read the opening sentence and it says something like, the company was established in stop. It isn't there. That's about history. If it says, immediately after the Second World War, the company faced difficulty, stop. It isn't there. So you can selectively find what you don't need to read just by reading one sentence. If you read a paragraph and the topic was looking towards the future, now that might be where your answer is. So read that paragraph in detail. And in that way, you can save time to allow you to think, no, what's meant here? What's the meaning of this word? And concentrate on the parts which have got the answer in them, not reading everything. And certainly don't read the text before you've read the questions. The questions are important. They inform you what to read more carefully. Okay. So we've looked at reading, then the big one, writing. We have an hour. And it's up to you how you split your time. There are two tasks. We refer to them from now on and in subsequent webinars as writing task 1 and writing task 2. Task 1 is worth 1/3 of the marks. Task 2 is worth the remaining 2/3. So they suggest that you should spend 20 minutes on task 1 and 40 minutes of your hour on task 2. That seems right. But if you don't finish task 1, if you just finish a sentence when you hear pens down, that might be okay. I don't need to see a conclusion in task 1, but I certainly need to see one in task 2. So I would suggest that you turn them round and that you do task 2 first. That takes a bit of thought. It's worth 2/3 of the mark. And if you get that over with, then you can relax a little, because task 1 pretty much writes itself if you know what you're doing. Following the SLC course, you should have a good idea of how to write any of the different types of task 1 that come about. Task 2, a little more difficult. That does require some thought from you. We show you techniques to brainstorm and to plan, but there's got to be some input from you, whereas task 1 pretty much writes itself. All the data you need is there. Let me show you what I mean. In task 1, you get given data in various forms, various formats. It might be a chart, a graph, some sort of illustrated, labeled picture. It might be a pie chart. It might be a table of figures. It might be a process, perhaps how to make the perfect sandwich, starting from selecting the bread all the way through to garnishing it on a plate. So lots of stages, but you're given all this, so there's no thought regarding content. All you have to do is make it flow and make it easy for the reader to read and understand. So it's clarity of writing that's being tested. The examiner wants not to be put under any strain. He wants to read it and it flows and it's sensible and it doesn't go back and forwards. So you have to understand what the data means. You have to then summarize it. You have to give an overview, identify any trends which might be there, and then the organization of the writing has got to make it easy to read, and the reader should read it with the visual, the graphics. The graphics would be there, and all you're doing is writing a summary, a report. Some IELTS teachers, some schools suggest that you give details. In this month it was 10, in month 2 it was 12. It dropped back a little in month 3 before rising sharply in month 4. That's not what an examiner is looking for. As an examiner, when I marked these, you could tell people who'd been to the wrong type of school that they gave you information which would seem the obvious thing to do. Tell me what you see on the graph. But I'm looking for a bit more of that, particularly at 7, 7.5. You need to come back and give me the overview. You need to show that you've understood the whole picture and that you're identifying general trends, not each individual time period or each individual figure. That's there on the graph. I want it to be a report showing that you've thought about the overall picture. And to do that, you'll need a good range of vocabulary, good range of grammar, and the organizational skills to make it flow. You'll have to use fixed expressions. You'll have to work out how to properly use phrases like a large increase, or prices increased sharply, or there was a sharp increase. Those are different. That's verb with adverb or adjective with noun. Mix them up and your mark goes down. Okay, so that's it for task 1. Let's have a look at task 2. You will need to write a minimum of 250 words in your 40 minutes. To reach the 7 or 7.5 mark, which is what we're looking to work in the UK in hospital, the minimum is realistically much higher than 250. 250 is the absolute minimum. Below that, you affect your band score anyway. Less than 250, it comes down half a band. But realistically, to get to 7.5 or to 7, you're going to have to do 320, 350. Once again, organization is key. Signposting, letting the reader know what's coming next, making this flow of writing. That's worth a great deal of the mark. Again, you'll have to demonstrate a range of grammar used accurately to get to 7. You'll need a high level of vocabulary. For example, if you write buy, that's okay. I know what you mean. You've gone to a shop or a supplier and you've exchanged money to get something. But I suggest we're not getting something by buying it. You obtain it by purchasing it. So upping our vocabulary level. Every time you use one of these higher level academic words, you've ticked another box. The examiner's happy. And you'll need to show a range of phrases being used correctly. Okay. Good news is the thing you will advance most rapidly in speaking, easiest skill to acquire, particularly in an English-speaking environment. This gets better really quickly. Also in speaking, the requirement for vocabulary is less. We don't speak in academic phrases. We use much more down-to-earth, face-to-face words, so it's easier to get a higher score in speaking. Good news. What's in the speaking test? Well, it's in 3 sections. It gets progressively harder. The first section is like an interview. You know very well what the answers are. Tell me about where you live. Do you work or study? Where have you studied English? No problems to answer these. You already know the answers. What might be a problem is the middle section. We call it in IELTS the long turn, because it's your turn to speak and you have to speak for a long time. Those of you who've already done the test will know that the 1 minute you get to prepare is the shortest minute of your life, and the 2 minutes you get to speak are the longest 2 minutes. It seems that it's never going to stop. Those 2 minutes to fill with good speech seem terrible. But I've got techniques which will help you. I watched a teacher I was observing a lesson by another teacher the other week, and he had some good techniques. I'm going to steal some of those from him and put them into my lessons. So there are lots of techniques which we can use to maximize your mark there. And then the third part, this is what sorts the 7s and the 8s out, the in-depth discussion. These are questions which maybe you don't know the answer to. You're being asked at that time to compare now with the past, perhaps, or to speculate what might happen in the future. And maybe you haven't thought about these. But again, we've got techniques, we've got ways to compare that. You must always think about the tense you're using. If the examiner asks you to compare with the past, well, you need had, was, in the past, phrases like this. But looking to the future, you'll need a different set. You'll need to change the tense and the vocabulary. It's thought that, or we will probably, or perhaps we might, that sort of phrase. But in all of the speaking, the examiner's looking for the candidate keeping on topic, using a range of vocabulary, a range of grammar, and again, coherence and cohesion, making the speech naturally flow. So how can we make sure that we stay on track and keep the examiner smiling? Well, this is where SLC comes in. We're running one-to-one courses for doctors from overseas to come and work in the UK. As I said earlier, we need an overall 7.5. Slightly different for nurses. They need 7 in all areas, but we can help. We've got a network of trainers. I can call on teachers and trainers from all over the world, so time zones are not a problem. We've got lots of ex-IELTS examiners. I myself was an IELTS examiner when I worked in Southeast Asia. I write materials now. I write materials for the British Council, for example, and several others of my teachers write exam questions. So altogether, with SLC, you've got years of IELTS teaching, course design, course management. So if anybody can get you through it, it's the people who know the exam. We know what the examiners are looking for. And as my doctor from India this morning proved, it is working. It works. So he got overall 8. So that's me with my brief overview of what IELTS is. Now it's over to you. Do you have questions? So as Kate said, type them into the chat box and we'll have a look what you come up with. So I'll stop sharing now and it's over to you to ask some questions. There we are. So let's have a look at my chat box. Okay, but so far in the chat we've got answers to the poll. So we looked at the poll before the voting section came up. Does anyone have a question about IELTS exams? I'm just looking at the list of people attending, several names that I recognize. So, okay. So I'm taking my UK VI on February the 20th. Is it the same with IELTS? Yeah, the VI part just means verified identification. And basically, it's not a difference between tests. The test is the same as IELTS. It is an IELTS test. The difference is your identification is more closely looked at. It's a more secure test. In the past, people have sent their cousin to sit their IELTS test. And if their cousin looks similar, they've got away with it. So people have been awarded an IELTS test result, and when they've come to study or to work, they're nowhere near. And it came to the attention of IELTS that this was happening too often. So the VI is just verified identification. It means that we know who it is. So no difference in the test content. It's the same test as people in another center will be taking. So does that answer your question, Ariane? Okay. Someone else typing. I can see one of my students. One of my students is taking her test tomorrow. Any last minute questions? I'll say who it is. It's Joanne. Joanne, any questions for tomorrow, or are you all set to go? No, here's a question from Brian. Thank you, Brian. What are the usual topics being discussed in the writing test? Well, I wish I knew. I wish I could predict that. It would be so much easier. The usual topics, well, as I said, that they choose them from a fairly limited range of overall topics, but it's impossible to say you will get a question about this. This is definite. The type of question which comes up very often is something that you've all done. So if you're taking an IELTS test, you've been to school. So there might be a question about education. Do you think education should be paid for privately or funded by the government? Discuss. Or discipline in schools needs to be strengthened because bad behavior is getting worse. Do you agree or disagree? Or what are the causes of bad behavior? And can you suggest some solutions? So there'd be lots about education, healthcare, and how people stay healthy, and threats to health, perhaps malaria or bad diet. These are very popular. Probably the most popular is about climate change, the environment, loss of habitat, perhaps. They're probably the main areas. You'd be almost expecting something on those, but it can be really from anything that the whole world. Remember, the I in IELTS is international. It can be anything which the world would be able to talk about. So I'm sorry to not have such a precise answer, Brian, but the usual hard, big breadth. Now, Joanna's asked a question. You're welcome, Brian. Okay. Are problem and solution questions very common? Okay. Those of you who've looked at the book that we use for writing, and we chose that book because it's a very, very good coverage for all of the question types. And Joanna's asked, problem and solution questions, are they common? Well, no, they form a minority. I'm not sure the exact percentage, maybe 15 or 20%, 15% perhaps. The most common would be an argumentative essay. Do you agree or disagree? What are the pros and cons? Where you've got two sides, and no matter which one you finally decide is your view, the examiner's looking for a balanced look at both sides of the argument. So don't just write on the one you think. But how common are problem and solution essays? Not very, but if we didn't cover them in the book, the chances are you're all sorted, ready to do any question argumentatively. You get there on the day and you get a problem and solution essay. What is this? So we've covered them, but they're not the most common. So good luck tomorrow, by the way. Now, more questions coming in. What can we do to help us when we're not in class? Are there exercises that we can do at home to practice? Yes, there are. You want as much in as possible. So you want practice listening to a variety of accents. So maybe catch the news in different channels. Maybe pick up an Australian news channel. CNN will get some American accents. The BBC for some British accents. Do some listening of different accents. Get as much practice as you can. Another thing you can do, again, in input, a lot of reading. If you've got a choice, do I do a crossword or do I chat with my friend? Neither. Do some reading, and then when you've done your IELTS test, do as many crosswords and have as many chats as you like, but concentrate for a month or two. And what else could we do? You can practice transformation of sentences. You might see an advert in a newspaper or read something in English. Try to change it. And how could you say the same thing in another way? Practice paraphrasing. That's a skill which I've noticed of late we're not very good at. So I'm including that in one of the seminars about writing, one of the webinars about writing. So you'll see further what I mean there. But yeah, there's a lot you can do, particularly on the input through your ears and eyes. Another question from Ariane. So do we have a standardized pattern for our review, or can we personally choose where to start or to focus on? Since we know our weakest points, my Waterloo is writing and listening. Then I want to focus on polishing my speaking too. I'm conscious that most of you have writing as your weak point. So that's what we focus on. But yes, we can put in sessions where you know you're weak. I can do speaking tests as if I was an examiner. I can do a speaking test and let you know. You get the idea of what it's like. Then I'll be able to pinpoint your strengths and weaknesses. So yes, we can tailor it to some extent. If you're more confident with your writing, we don't need to slog through the unit just because it should be Unit 8. If you say, Task 1 I have no problem with, I can allocate some of that time to another area. Yeah, so we can tailor it. Are we going to receive exercises for all skills? From Sheila. Hello, Sheila. Are we going to receive for all skills? I can certainly point you in the direction. We can do a speaking test, which will highlight strengths and weaknesses. I can point you in the direction of other exercises. Yes, I've got huge banks of material. There'll also be opportunity to look at support through SLC's bank of material and exercises, which you'll get access to. So yeah, you can self-select which areas you want to concentrate on from the huge bank of material. Yeah. If you specifically ask me, can you look at my reading skills? Can you look at my speaking? I can certainly arrange for myself or another of the tutors to look at that, to concentrate on an area that you've identified yourself. Yeah. Yes, the program, the bank of material is written by a very experienced company who I've been dealing with for almost 10 years now, called Guided E-Learning. Guided E-Learning used to have a very good general English site with 1,000 pages, more than 1,000 pages. I did a couple of IELTS speaking tests for them on video, so they've got videos of tests. I'm not sure whether I'm still on there. It's a while ago, some years ago. But Guided E-Learning have now got a new site which is concentrating on IELTS because we're so many people are asking for it. So IELTS is certainly something that you can look at on Guided E-Learning as part of your package. It's a great program. I would suggest that you log on to that and use it as often as you can. Every bit of input, every bit of practice will help. And I'm confident that for most of you, you'll only have to do an IELTS test once more. If you follow our plan and do everything we ask of you, that's it. You're up to speed. You'll get 7 or more. Now, oh, there's a question and answer at the bottom. Let me have a look at that. I can't see that one. There it is. Xavier, hello. About how many high-level vocabulary can be incorporated in writing task 2? Is it all right to put too much lexical resources in this task, or is it better to have a mixture of both simple and high-level vocabulary? My answer to that one, Xavier, would be if there's an alternative which you know is high-level, use it. Don't say buy when you could say purchase. Don't say get when you could say obtain. If at all possible in the writing, up the level of vocabulary. Don't make the phrases so pompous that it becomes difficult to read. Keep it clear, but yes, where there's a possibility, put the best vocabulary that you can into that. How about the schedules of review? How often can we have it? Oh, this is something which your Ariane's asked. What about the schedule of review? How often can we have it? Once Kate, the program manager, has made an initial contact with you and arranged for you to work with a tutor, you'll have your first lesson arranged by Kate. Then after that, once you've finished that lesson, the teacher will arrange when the next one will be. So how often? Well, will fit in with you. Ideally, you want to be doing at least once a week. Once every day is not enough time to have done the unit. You need to work through the units in the book. You need to do, we will point you to things on Guided E-Learning. We'll give you exercises to do. So every day is pointless because you don't have enough time to consolidate and to learn. But once a week, perhaps twice a week would be good. Once every 3 weeks is useless and will take far too long. That's not enough. So the schedule will fit in with your timetable, but very much for you to negotiate with your tutor. Okay. Mark's asked a question. In the speaking section, does it need to be lengthy or a concise and accurate answer more advisable? My review school categorized 2 types of interviewers, one that asks many questions and ones that ask fewer questions. How do you deal with them? If they're asking a lot of questions, it's because they've got a lot of short answers. If you give him a long answer and you're speaking in English and it's making sense and it's on topic, he won't stop you. You'll only get a question when you begin to repeat or you stop speaking. If you're still talking and it's on topic, you won't be interrupted. So they only ask more questions when you stop talking or they stop you. So if they ask you a question, you've begun to repeat. or it's not making sense, or possibly you're off topic. So do you need to give a lengthy answer? You need to give sufficient answer to explain what you want to talk about. I hope that makes sense. And another one from Ariane. How about if we're asked to tackle something we don't know about? Does it mean a failing mark? An interesting question, Ariane. You might be asked to talk about something which you really haven't thought about. There's ways round. You can say, perhaps you're asked, can you talk about art in art galleries? Now, maybe you have no interest whatsoever in paintings and sculptures, and you've never visited an art gallery, for example. So you can say, well, to be honest, it's something which I don't do. I should get around to visiting an art gallery more often than I do. Perhaps I should get together with some friends and go there and just have a look to see what takes my fancy. But I don't really know, because it's something I don't do. So you've told the examiner nothing about art, but you've kept on topic, but you've told him why you can't answer the question by keeping on topic and showing the negative, the other side of the coin. So something like that would be the way to tackle an unknown topic. So I'm conscious that we've had our time. We're now 12:05, and I have a doctor in Egypt who is waiting for me to call him. So I should get on to my next class, and all remains for me to say is thank you very much for attending. I hope you've got something out of that, and we've answered some questions for you. Do join us again when we advertise the subsequent webinars. We'll be looking at the skills in more detail, giving you more techniques or strategies to tackle it effectively and get the mark you need. These will also be uploaded somewhere on the internet. I'm not sure whether we're going to put them on a YouTube site or somewhere on the SLC site, but we'll send you links to show where the webinars are stored, and you can look at them again to review. So thank you. Thanks for attending. I hope you got something out of it. I'll speak to some of you later. I recognize some of the names on my list. Those of you who I haven't met, maybe we will. Maybe I'll be your tutor, perhaps someone else. But welcome to SLC, and we'll get you the score you need. So thank you very much. Goodbye.